In the far reaches of the galaxy, the planet Talysis faced its darkest hour. Once a thriving world, now it was on the brink of destruction. The Zorath, a brutal and unyielding alien race, had set their sights on Talysis. Their fleets were enormous, their weapons powerful and their resolve unwavering. The Talysesians, a peaceful and technologically advanced race, had no hope of defending themselves against the overwhelming might of the Zorath. Desperation had set in. The leaders of Talysis, knowing they were no match for the invaders, sent out a distress call. But it wasn't just any cry for help, it was a final plea to the galaxy. Their message echoed across the stars, hoping for a response from any who could hear. They knew it was a long shot. For years, Talysis had been a quiet corner of the galaxy, largely ignored by the great powers that ruled the stars. Now, with the galaxy in turmoil, they had no allies left. The Zorath had already wiped out most of the neighboring planets, and the few allies Talysis once had abandoned them. It seemed as if the galaxy had given up on them. Their only hope was the faintest glimmer of support from a race that had always been viewed as weak: humans. For years, humanity had been seen as nothing more than a primitive species, too young to play a role in the grand cosmic drama. Their technology, though advancing rapidly, was still far behind the other galactic civilizations. The great empires of the galaxy had long dismissed humans as unimportant, too insignificant to matter. But in their time of need, the Talysesians held on to the hope that somehow humans might come to their aid. Admiral Trent, commander of the human fleet, was sitting in the command center aboard the Titan, a ship that had become humanity's first great warship. The fleet was small, but it was fierce, and they had a reputation for being unpredictable. Trent had received the distress call just hours before. As he listened to the message, a sense of duty surged through him. He knew that the galaxy would ignore this plea for help. It wasn't the first time a planet had been left to its fate, but humanity was different. They weren't like the other galactic powers that turned their backs when things got tough. The decision was made. Humanity would stand and fight. "Prepare the fleet," Trent ordered, his voice steady. "We're going to Talysis." His crew scrambled to their stations, readying the Titan and the fleet of smaller human ships that had been stationed near the edge of their territory. The humans had no illusions about the battle that lay ahead. The Zorath were powerful, and their numbers were staggering. But they also knew one thing that no one else did. Humans fought not just for survival, but for something more: honor, duty, and a sense of justice. As the fleet powered up and the engines hummed to life, Admiral Trent stood at the helm, staring out into the vastness of space. He knew that this was not just a battle for Talysis, it was a battle for humanity's place in the galaxy. And if they were to win, they would need to show the galaxy exactly what humans were capable of. The fleet set a course for Talysis, a planet on the brink of annihilation. But now, with the arrival of the humans, there was a new hope. The galaxy may have given up on them, but humanity was about to show the galaxy that they would never give up on anyone. The human fleet emerged from the depths of hyperspace, appearing on the edge of Talysis's star system. The planets of the galaxy had long dismissed humanity as an insignificant player, but today, the Titan and its fleet of ships arrived with a promise. They would stand against the Zorath and fight for the people of Talysis. The fleet, led by Admiral Trent, was smaller than the forces the Zorath had sent, but it was quick, efficient, and armed with weapons that the enemy had never seen before. The human ships were agile, designed for precise strikes and swift maneuvers. Unlike the massive Zorath warships, which relied on overwhelming firepower, the humans relied on strategy, speed, and technology that could outsmart the enemy. The Talysesians watched in awe as the fleet appeared in orbit above their planet. They had nearly given up hope, convinced that no one would come. They had sent out their distress calls, but every reply had been a hollow promise, empty words from the galactic powers who had no intention of helping. The message from Earth had been different. It was sincere, and the humans had followed through. Admiral Trent stood at the command center aboard the Titan, looking out at the bright blue and green world of Talysis below. The planet was beautiful, but it was scarred, its cities burning from the relentless assault by the Zorath. It was a world on the edge of destruction, a place where people were fighting to survive. And yet, in the midst of all this chaos, the arrival of the humans was a beacon of hope. "Admiral Trent, we're receiving signals from Talysis," Lieutenant Carson reported. "They're asking if we've come to help." Trent nodded, his eyes fixed on the planet below. "Tell them we've come to fight, we won't let them fall." The comms officer sent the message, and moments later, the response came. The Talysesians had never expected such a quick answer. The hope that had faded returned, bright and strong. "Thank you, humans," came the voice on the other end, filled with emotion. "We thought we were alone." Admiral Trent turned to his crew. "This is our moment. We're not just here to fight, we're here to win. We're going to show the Zorath that humans can't be ignored." The fleet made its way closer to Talysis's surface, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a brutal conflict. But Trent had a plan. They would not meet the Zorath head-on in a war of attrition. Instead, they would strike at their weaknesses, outmaneuver them, and force them to fight on humanity's terms. As the human ships entered the planet's atmosphere, the Zorath began to take notice. Their massive warships had been sweeping through, the star system destroying everything in their path. Now they saw the humans, small in number but fierce and determined. The Zorath commanders couldn't believe their eyes. They had thought the humans were nothing more than primitive creatures who didn't stand a chance against the might of the Zorath Empire. But now, that belief was being tested. "Engage all systems," Trent ordered. "We're making our stand here. Talysis is not alone anymore." The human ships broke formation and began their descent into the heart of the battle, their weapons charging, ready to defend the planet. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the Talysisians felt a spark of hope. The humans had come, and they were going to fight. The battle had only just begun, but the galaxy was already beginning to understand one thing: humanity was not to be underestimated. The Zorath fleet, massive and terrifying, loomed in the distance as the human ships advanced toward Talysis. The Zorath had already claimed the outer rim of the system, their warships blocking any escape. The planet's defenders, once proud and powerful, were now struggling to keep their cities intact. The situation seemed hopeless. But now the humans had arrived, and the Zorath were about to experience something they had never encountered before: human ingenuity and determination. Admiral Trent stood on the bridge of the Titan, watching as his fleet formed up with precision. The human ships were smaller and faster than the Zorath vessels. Designed for hit-and-run tactics rather than direct confrontation, Trent knew that taking on the enemy head-on would be a disaster. Instead, they would use their speed and knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the Zorath, forcing them into a series of mistakes. All ships form up for evasive maneuvers. "We don't take the Zorath head-on," Trent ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Engage when you have an opening and don't let them surround you." His fleet consisted of a handful of ships, small, sleek, and fast. The Titan itself was the largest ship, a formidable warship, but even it was dwarfed by the Zorath's massive battleships. Still, Trent had a plan, and it relied on their ability to outthink the enemy. He had spent years preparing for a fight like this, studying the tactics of his adversaries. The Zorath were brutal and relentless, but they were predictable. The first wave of Zorath ships charged forward, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. They fired massive laser beams, but the human ships were already on the move. The humans had learned long ago how to avoid the kind of blunt force the Zorath relied on. Instead of engaging directly, the Titan and its fleet weaved in and out of the incoming fire, using the debris of the battlefield as cover. A Zorath battleship fired at one of the smaller human vessels, but the ship easily dodged the blast and returned fire with precision, hitting the Zorath ship's weak spot. The Zorath ship exploded, sending debris scattering in all directions. The Zorath commanders were furious, unable to comprehend how such a small force could avoid their attacks and strike with such precision. "This is impossible," one of the Zorath commanders growled, watching his fleet struggle against the humans. "These creatures should not be able to fight like this." Admiral Trent was well aware that this first victory wouldn't be enough. The Zorath would adjust their tactics and the battle would become much harder. But for now, he watched as his fleet carried out their orders with military precision, their ships darting around the much larger Zorath vessels like insects buzzing around a predator. The battle raged on with the human fleet slowly gaining ground. The Zorath, frustrated by their inability to land a decisive blow, began to shift their strategy. They deployed smaller, faster ships in an attempt to corner the humans. But the humans were ready. The Titan led a charge, forcing the Zorath into a trap. And with a well-placed strike, another Zorath battleship went down. The Talisians watched in awe as the human ships continued to fight. It was nothing short of miraculous. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The Zorath had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Admiral Trent stood on the bridge, his eyes focused on the battlefield below. He knew this was just the beginning. The Zorath would send more forces and the real test was yet to come. But for now, the humans had done what no one else in the galaxy had. They had struck back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Talisis had hope. The battle had shifted in the humans' favor, but Admiral Trent knew the war was far from over. The Zorath were a relentless enemy, and though the human fleet had made a significant impact, the Zorath were adapting quickly. It was only a matter of time before they would send more reinforcements. But for now, there was a moment of peace, amidst the chaos. A moment that allowed Admiral Trent and the Talisians to reflect on the bond that had begun to form between them. On the surface of Talisis, in one of the few remaining safe zones, the human and Talisians gathered. The human soldiers, many of whom had never been this far from Earth, found themselves surrounded by Talisians, who were tall and elegant with their soft, translucent skin. Despite their differences, the connection between them felt real, like a shared understanding that they were fighting for something greater than just survival. They were fighting for each other. In a small command tent, Admiral Trent met with Jorik, the commander of the Talisis forces. The two men, despite the vast differences in their races and cultures, had quickly come to respect each other. Jorik had once been a fierce warrior, but the war had taken its toll. His people had seen too many of their cities fall, too many of their families destroyed. He had been prepared to give up, to surrender to the Zorath. But the arrival of the humans had reignited something in him, hope. "I don't know how to thank you," Jorik said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Your people have given us something no one else has, belief." Admiral Trent smiled, but his gaze was serious. "We don't fight for thanks, Jorik. We fight because it's the right thing to do. We fight because we know what it's like to be ignored, to be left alone when the rest of the galaxy moves on. But humans don't turn our backs on people in need. Not if we can help it." Jorik nodded, understanding the weight of Trent's words. He had seen it for himself. The human fleet didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't care about the consequences. They simply acted. And that, Jorik realized, was why they were winning. The two commanders spent the next few hours discussing tactics, coordinating the defense of the planet. The Talisians had their own advanced technology, but it was different from the human technology. The humans brought a new perspective, one of adaptability and resourcefulness. They had developed strategies the Talisians hadn't thought of, ways to use the terrain to their advantage, ways to confuse the Zorath and break their lines. As they worked together, the bond between the humans and Talisians grew stronger. The war was far from over, but there was a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Both sides knew that they couldn't do this alone. The Zorath were too powerful, their numbers too great. But together, humans and Talisians would fight side by side until the end. Outside the tent, human soldiers trained with Talisians, exchanging knowledge and techniques. There was an ease to the cooperation, a willingness to learn from each other. A human soldier, young and eager, watched a Talisian warrior demonstrate a series of quick, fluid moves. The soldier tried to replicate them, stumbling at first, but the Talisian patiently guided him through the motions. There was no judgment, only support. In turn, the humans taught the Talisians how to make better use of their weapons, explaining tactics that had served them well in the past. It was clear that both sides were growing stronger together, learning from each other, and for the first time, the Talasicians were beginning to believe that, with the humans by their side, they might just stand a chance against the Zorath. As the sun set over the war-torn landscape, Admiral Trent stood with Jorik looking out at the horizon. The sky was painted with colors of hope, a hope that had not existed for Telesis just days before. "This is only the beginning," Trent said quietly. "But we'll win this war, Jorik. I promise you that." Jorik looked at him, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Then we fight together to the end." And for the first time, the humans and Talasicians knew, without a doubt, that they were no longer alone. The victory in the first few battles had energized the humans and Talasicians, but Admiral Trent knew it was only a matter of time before the Zorath launched their retaliation. The Zorath were a proud and brutal race, and they would not simply let their losses go unpunished. After all, this was not just a fight for Telesis, it was a fight for their dominance in the galaxy. In the days following the initial victories, the humans and Talasicians worked side by side to fortify their defenses. New strategies were drawn up, weapons were upgraded, and soldiers trained relentlessly. The Zorath had underestimated the humans before, but now they were learning from their mistakes. They wouldn't make the same error twice. One day, as Admiral Trent walked the corridors of the Titan, a grim report came through. The Zorath had mobilized their full force and were on their way. This time, they weren't just sending a few ships. They were sending everything. Hundreds of warships, cruisers, and dreadnoughts, all equipped with the deadliest weapons the Zorath had ever designed. The enemy was coming, and they were coming with vengeance. "We need to prepare," Trent said to his officers, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Zorath will not hold back this time. We'll need to outthink them, outmaneuver them." On the surface of Telesis, the Talasicians knew the stakes had grown even higher. They had seen the destruction the Zorath had left in their wake. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, and millions of lives had been lost. The humans had given them hope, but hope alone wouldn't win the war. They needed more than just the courage to fight. They needed to be smarter, faster, and more unified than ever before. In the war room, Admiral Trent met with Jorik to discuss their next move. The Talasicians had their strengths: advanced technology, vast knowledge of their terrain, and a deep connection to the planet itself. But the Zorath were ruthless, and their sheer numbers could easily overwhelm them. Trent knew they had to take risks if they were going to win. "We'll use their overconfidence against them," Trent suggested. "We need to bait them. Let them think they've won, then hit them where they least expect it." Jorik was skeptical at first. "The Zorath won't fall for it. They'll know we're trying to trap them." "That's exactly what we want them to think," Trent replied, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We'll give them a taste, a victory, then we'll strike. We'll hit their command ships, their fleet leaders. If we take out their chain of command, the rest will fall apart." Jorik nodded slowly, realizing the brilliance of Trent's plan. "It's a risky move. If we fail, we lose everything." "It's the only chance we've got," Trent said. "We've got no other choice." As the Zorath fleet drew closer, the tension on Telesis reached its peak. The humans and Talasicians put their plan into action, preparing their ships and positioning themselves in ways that would confuse and outmaneuver the enemy. The Zorath, confident in their overwhelming strength, took the bait and moved in for what they thought would be a quick victory. But as the battle unfolded, they realized too late that they had underestimated their enemies once again. Human ships darted in and out of the Zorath formations, hitting their command ships with pinpoint accuracy. The Zorath, confused and disorganized, found themselves scrambling to respond. Admiral Trent's voice rang through the comms. "Now hit them with everything we've got." The humans and Talasicians unleashed a barrage of weapons, targeting the heart of the Zorath fleet. Explosions rocked the battlefield as one Zorath warship after another was destroyed. The humans, small in number but fierce in their tactics, had once again proven that they were not to be underestimated. But despite the damage, the Zorath were not easily defeated. Their leaders fought back with everything they had, launching counterattacks and rallying their forces. The battle raged on, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Admiral Trent stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the chaotic scene below. The humans had done the impossible. They had struck back with strength and strategy, but the war was far from over. The Zorath would not stop, and neither would the humans. "Prepare for the next wave," Trent said. "This isn't over yet." For the first time, the Zorath realized they were facing an enemy they could not easily crush. Humans were no longer the weak, ignored species they had once been. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. The 34 Fart. Many the battle had been fierce, but Admiral Trent knew that the human fleet had only bought a temporary victory. The Zorath were regrouping, and it was only a matter of time before they launched their next wave of attacks. The humans and Talasicians had done well to push back the enemy, but Trent could feel the pressure mounting. Talasis was still on the brink of collapse, and they needed a decisive blow to break the Zorath's momentum. It was in the quiet moments of preparation, while the ships were being repaired and soldiers rested, that Admiral Trent made a decision. They needed something more, something powerful enough to change the course of the war. The humans had something. The Zorath didn't. Ingenuity. But even ingenuity had its limits. Now it was time to push the boundaries of their technology. "We need something that can take down their largest warships in one strike," Trent said, his voice serious as he spoke to his senior engineers. "I don't care what it takes, find a way to do it." The engineers, a group of brilliant minds from Earth, had been working tirelessly, adapting human technology to suit the needs of the war. They had already improved their weapons and shields, but the Zorath's defenses were formidable. Trent knew that they needed a new weapon, something capable of turning the tide. One of the lead engineers, a young woman named Captain Lara, approached him with a plan. "Sir, we've been experimenting with energy weapons, but the power required to break through the Zorath shields is far beyond anything we've used before. If we can channel our energy reserves into a single shot, it could destroy a Zorath ship. But it's risky. The energy required will leave us vulnerable, and it might not work at all." Trent thought for a moment, weighing the risks. "How long will it take to prepare?" 2 days, maybe 3, Captain Lara replied. "We'll need to reroute all power to the weapon and hope it holds up under the pressure." Trent nodded. "Do it. We'll take the risk. We don't have time to wait for the perfect solution." With the decision made, the engineers went to work, modifying the human warships to accommodate the new weapon. Meanwhile, Admiral Trent communicated with Jorik, the Talesian commander, to prepare their forces for what would be the final battle. The Zorath had already taken so much from them. This would be the moment when they took it all back. As the human ships and Talesian forces worked together to ready their defenses, the Zorath moved into position. The air was thick with tension. This would not be just another skirmish. It would be the decisive battle that would determine the fate of Telesis and possibly the entire galaxy. The humans were no longer just defending. They were about to go on the offensive. The first wave of Zorath ships moved toward the planet, their weapons primed and ready. The human fleet, now bolstered by the new weapon, positioned itself in front of Telesis. The Zorath had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the humans. The humans weren't fighting out of desperation anymore. They were fighting to win. Admiral Trent stood at the command center of the Titan, his eyes fixed on the screens. "This is it," he said, his voice calm yet filled with a deep resolve. "All ships, prepare to engage. Once we fire, we don't stop until we've won." The energy cannon aboard the Titan hummed to life, its power building. The human fleet's shields were pushed to their limits as they braced for the incoming assault. And then, with a flash of light, the weapon fired. A brilliant beam of energy cutting through space aimed directly at the heart of the Zorath fleet. The result was immediate and devastating. The Zorath battleship at the center of the fleet was hit directly, its shields unable to withstand the force. The ship exploded in a blinding burst of light, its massive hull splitting apart. The Zorath fleet was thrown into disarray. For the first time, they knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of a weapon they couldn't defend against. Admiral Trent watched the chaos unfold, knowing that this was the turning point. The humans had struck a blow they couldn't recover from. But as the Zorath retreated, Admiral Trent knew the war was far from over. The Zorath would return, angrier and more determined than ever. But now, for the first time, the humans and Talasisians had a weapon they could rely on, a BIT, weapon that could change the course of the galaxy. The fight was just beginning and the humans were ready, too many. The Zorath, battered but far from broken, had retreated into the darkness of space. But Admiral Trent knew better than to believe the battle was over. The Zorath would regroup. They always did. And when they came back, they would come back stronger, angrier and more determined to crush the humans and Talasisians for what they had done. But now, the humans had something they didn't before. A powerful weapon that could pierce through the Zorath's formidable shields. The energy cannon had made a difference in the last battle, but the human fleet wasn't about to rest on its laurels. This was just the beginning of what would become an all-out assault. In the command center aboard the Titan, Admiral Trent stood, gazing at the holographic map of the battlefield. His mind raced through strategies, weighing the risks. They couldn't afford to give the Zorath time to rebuild their forces. This was their moment. The Zorath might have retreated, but they would not be caught off guard again. "Prepare the fleet," Trent said, his voice firm. "We're going after them." The human ships, including the Titan, had been refueled, rearmed, and were now ready for the next phase of the war. With their energy weapon fully operational and their fleet working together more seamlessly than ever, the humans had become a force that the Zorath couldn't ignore. Jorik, the Talesian commander, had agreed to join the offensive, bringing with him the last of Talesis's military forces. The Talasisians had suffered greatly, but they were ready to fight once more, united with the humans in their common cause. They had nothing left to lose. The two commanders stood together in the war room, watching as their fleets prepared to jump into the heart of Zorath-controlled space. "We'll take the fight to them," Trent said, his gaze unyielding. "The Zorath thought they could crush us. They thought we were just another weak race in the galaxy. But they'll learn. Humans don't back down." Jorik nodded, his expression resolute. "Talesis will fight with you until the end. We owe you everything." The words struck a chord in Trent. They were no longer just allies, they were friends. They were all fighting for the same thing: survival, justice, and the chance to live without fear. The thought of what was at stake pushed them all forward, uniting them in a way that the Zorath could never understand. The fleet jumped into Zorath space, the Titan and its companions weaving through the stars toward their enemy's heart. The Zorath were not expecting an attack so soon. They were still licking their wounds, trying to rebuild after their losses. It was the perfect time to strike. Admiral Trent's voice rang out across the comms. "Target their command ship first. Take out the leadership and the rest will fall apart." The human fleet moved swiftly, launching coordinated strikes on the Zorath's command center. As the battle raged on, the Zorath were forced to scatter, their ships trying to defend against the relentless assault. But it was clear that they were losing control. The humans and Talasisians moved as one, their tactics unpredictable and their strikes precise. Then, the moment arrived. The Titan fired its energy cannon once more, this time aimed directly at the Zorath flagship. The beam cut through space with stunning force, hitting the heart of the massive ship. The Zorath flagship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Zorath commanders screamed in fury as their leadership crumbled. Without their flagship, the Zorath fleet was lost. The remaining ships, scattered in disarray, retreating from the human and Talesian forces. Admiral Trent stood in silence as the victory unfolded before him. The human fleet had dealt a decisive blow to the Zorath, and the galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in history, a small, underestimated race had defied the odds and sent one of the most fearsome empires in the galaxy into retreat. But Trent knew this wasn't the end. The Zorath would come again. There would be more battles, more challenges. But now, with the humans and Talasisians united and stronger than ever, they would face whatever came next, together. "The war isn't over?" Trent said quietly, his eyes fixed on the fading remnants of the Zorath fleet. But this is the turning point, and we won't let them win. The victory over the Zorath was a turning point, but it came at a great cost. The humans and Talasicians had fought with everything they had, and though the Zorath had been pushed back, the battle had left its mark. Talisis was in ruins, its cities still smoldering from the relentless bombardment. The survivors, though grateful for the humans' help, could not ignore the devastation around them. Admiral Trent stood on the bridge of the Titan, looking out at the planet below. Talisis was a beautiful world, but now it was scarred. The damage to the planet was immense, and the task of rebuilding would be long and difficult. Yet in the midst of the destruction, there was hope. The Zorath had been defeated, at least for now, and Talisis had not fallen completely. "Admiral, we've completed the damage assessment," Lieutenant Carson said, his voice somber. "The cost is high, but we've stopped the Zorath for the time being. The Talasicians are already beginning the recovery process." Trent nodded, his face reflecting the weight of the decision. They had won the battle, but at what cost? Hundreds of human and Talisian lives had been lost. The Titan had taken heavy damage, and many of its crew were now recovering in makeshift medical facilities. For all the progress they had made, the scars of war would linger for a long time. "It's not enough," Trent muttered to himself. "We need to do more." He left the bridge, heading to the war room where Jorik was already waiting. The Talesian commander was seated at the table, staring at the map of their ruined planet. Despite the victory, his expression was grim. Jorik had lost so much in this war, his people's cities destroyed, their way of life shattered. "Admiral," Jorik said, standing to greet him. "The battle is over, but the war has taken a toll. We are not the same people we were before the Zorath attacked. Talisis is broken." Trent took a seat, his eyes focused on the holographic map of Talisis. "I know, and we'll help rebuild. But I can't help but feel like there's more to be done. The Zorath will return eventually, and when they do, we'll need to be ready." Jorik sighed deeply. "We cannot keep relying on you, Admiral. The Talasicians must rebuild our own strength. But it will take time. Our people are tired, and our cities are gone. How do we move forward from here?" "It won't be easy," Trent said. "But we'll help however we can. You're not alone in this. We'll stand together until Talisis is strong again." The conversation paused, as both men stared at the map of Talisis. It was clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The planet needed rebuilding, and the Talasicians needed time to recover from the horrors they had faced. But despite the hardships, there was a shared understanding between the humans and Talasicians. They were allies, and they would fight for each other. In the days that followed, the humans worked alongside the Talasicians to help rebuild what had been lost. The human fleet, though damaged, remained in orbit, offering protection and assistance as Talisis began the process of recovery. It was not just about rebuilding cities. It was about rebuilding hope. For Admiral Trent, the cost of victory weighed heavily on him. The human fleet had achieved the impossible, but it had come at a price. They had stopped the Zorath, but there was no certainty that they had truly won. The war had left deep scars not just on the planet but on the people, yet in the midst of the destruction there was still hope. The humans had proven themselves capable of defying the odds. They had shown that even against the greatest of enemies they would never give up. And for the Talasicians, the memory of that fight, the strength of the humans who had stood by them, would be the spark that carried them through the difficult days ahead. "We'll rebuild," Trent said quietly, to himself, standing at the edge of the command center, looking out at the distant planet. "And when they come again, we'll be ready." The days after the battle were filled with work, recovery, and quiet reflection. Talisis was slowly beginning to heal, but it was clear that it would take much more than time to rebuild. The planet's cities were in ruins, its people scarred by the war that had come too close to ending their civilization. Yet, despite everything, there was a sense of something new in the air, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. The Zorath had retreated, and for the first time the people of Talisis were beginning to believe that they might have a chance at survival. Admiral Trent stood on the deck of the Titan, looking out over the planet below. His heart was heavy with the weight of the battles that had been fought, the lives that had been lost, and the challenges still ahead. The Zorath had not given up. He knew that for sure. They would come back, and when they did, the humans and Talasesians would need to be ready. "Admiral," Lieutenant Carson called out, interrupting his thoughts. "We've detected Zorath movement in the outer system. They're regrouping." Trent's eyes narrowed. He had been expecting this. The Zorath never stayed down for long, and their defeat had only made them more dangerous. "How many ships?" Carson checked his screen. "A full fleet, Admiral. The numbers are high, and they're coming in fast." Admiral Trent turned to face his crew. "Prepare the fleet. This time we don't wait for them to come to us. We meet them in space. It's time to finish this." The atmosphere aboard the Titan shifted instantly. The crew, though weary from the previous battle, snapped into action. The ship's weapon systems were recharged, the shields reinforced, and the fleet began to assemble. The Talasesians had their ships prepared as well, their warriors ready for whatever would come next. This would be the reckoning, the moment when they would either secure their future or face the end. Trent's voice rang through the command center. "This is it. We've already shown the galaxy what humans can do. Now let's show the Zorath that they made a mistake underestimating us." The Zorath fleet arrived in the Talasis system, their ships massive and menacing. They had learned from their previous losses and come prepared for a battle. This time, there would be no underestimation. They would fight with everything they had, but the humans were ready. Admiral Trent's fleet and the Talasesians were positioned strategically, waiting for the Zorath to make the first move. The humans' new energy weapon, which had already proven its worth, was prepared for another strike. The Zorath, eager for revenge, charged forward, their weapons blazing. They had the numbers, but the humans had the advantage of tactics. The human fleet moved with precision, using their smaller, faster ships to dart in and out of the Zorath formations, landing devastating blows where the Zorath were weakest. The Talasesians worked in perfect coordination with the humans, using their knowledge of the planet's atmosphere and terrain to their advantage. The battle was chaotic, with explosions lighting up the void of space as ships from both sides clashed in fierce combat. But despite the Zorath's numbers, they couldn't match the humans' unpredictability and their ability to strike swiftly and decisively. "Now!" Trent shouted as the signal to fire the energy cannon came. The Titan's weapon powered up, and in a single blinding flash it fired, cutting through the heart of the Zorath's flagship. The ship exploded in a violent burst of energy, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. The Zorath, their leadership destroyed, began to lose cohesion. Their remaining ships faltered as the humans and Talasesians pressed the attack. One by one, the Zorath vessels were destroyed, and soon the battlefield was littered with debris from their fallen ships. Admiral Trent watched the Zorath fleet retreat, their ships scattering into the void. He stood in silence, feeling the weight of the victory. They had done it. The Zorath had been defeated and Talasis had been saved. But even as the battle ended, Trent knew that peace would not last long. The galaxy was full of enemies, and the humans had proven themselves to be a force to be reckoned with. The reckoning was over for now, but the war was far from finished. "We've won," Trent said quietly, looking at his crew and the Talesian warriors who had fought alongside them. "But this is just the beginning. We stand together now and always." The Titan and its allies had fought hard, and they had won. But there was much more to come, and when the next fight came, they would be ready. The battle was over. The Zorath had been pushed back, their fleet scattered in retreat. Telesis was no longer under immediate threat. The damage to the planet was still vast, and the cost of the war weighed heavily on both the humans and Talasesians, but they had done what no one thought possible. They had defeated an empire. Admiral Trent stood on the command deck of the Titan, gazing out at the quiet expanse of space. The once bright blue of Telesis now appeared muted, covered by the shadow of the battle that had nearly destroyed it. Yet amidst the ashes there was something new, a spark of life, a sign that the people of Telesis, along with their human allies, could rebuild and rise again. The Talasesians had already started their recovery efforts. Engineers, medics, and workers from both the human fleet and Talasesians had joined forces to clear the debris and tend to the wounded. With the destruction of their cities, the Talasesians had faced immense loss. But there was a feeling of unity. Among them, a bond formed through the fire of battle. Admiral Trent's thoughts were interrupted by Lieutenant Carson's voice. "Sir, we've received messages from the rest of the galaxy. Other factions are offering assistance. The victory on Telesis is already being felt across the stars." Trent nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the planet below. The galaxy had stood silent for too long. The humans had proven themselves as powerful allies, and the galaxy could no longer ignore them. The events on Telesis had sent a clear message. Humans were no longer a minor species to be disregarded. They were here to stay, and they were ready to defend what they believed in. "We can't afford to stop here," Trent said, turning to Carson. "Telesis needs help rebuilding, and so does the rest of the galaxy. We need to prepare for what comes next." The lieutenant hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "You're right, Admiral. But what about the Zorath? They'll be back, won't they?" Trent looked out into the void, his expression serious. "The Zorath will return, no doubt. They're a relentless species, but we're ready. We've proven that we can fight back, and we've proven that we're not alone." He turned to face the crew gathered on the bridge, their eyes filled with the same determination that had driven them through the darkest hours. "This is just the beginning. We've earned their respect, but we can't stop now. We need to unite the galaxy, show them that there's more to humanity than just surviving. It's time for us to take a stand, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in freedom." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. Trent wasn't just speaking of Telesis anymore. He was speaking for the future of the entire galaxy. The humans had been underestimated, but now they had allies. And with those allies, they would stand tall, ready to defend not just their own world, but any world that needed help. As the Titan prepared to leave Telesis' orbit, Admiral Trent stood once more before the viewports, his gaze shifting from the planet below to the vast stars ahead. The Zorath may have been defeated, but many challenges lay ahead. The humans were not alone anymore. Telesis had shown them that unity and courage could conquer even the greatest of odds. With a deep breath, Trent whispered to himself, "The galaxy will never be the same." As the Titan moved toward its next mission, the human fleet, alongside their Telesian allies, knew that they had built something stronger than just an army. They had built hope.